from his studios in New York, it's time for Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, where sports meets life. Here's your host, Dan Tortora.
Welcome back here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora on wakeupcalldt.com, your one-stop sports shop, and on mixlr.com/wakeupcalldt. Want to thank all of our listeners, including up and down the East Coast and for the entire Atlantic Coast Conference. 15 different schools comprising this conference, and I'm happy to have the commissioner, who is no stranger to the broadcast, back onto the show. That is John Swofford. John, how you doing today?
Dan, I'm doing well, thank you. I hope you are.
I'm doing very well. And John, we have a lot of topics to get to here in our time to discuss, but I have to ask you one that just kind of threw me off here recently. And have you ever seen a shoe blow up in the middle of a game?
No, I have not. Not in the middle of a game or anywhere else, for that matter. Very, very unusual, obviously.
And to see that kind of going off of that, Zion Williamson, I mean, the way that he plays with such tenacity, have you seen a player like him before? I mean, you've been connected with the ACC for a very long time. Is there anybody inside of the ACC or in basketball in general that has resembled Zion Williamson, or do you believe he's kind of in a league of his own, so to speak?
Well, I think he's one of a kind. There have been an awful lot of great players, obviously, in this league and throughout basketball. So he's not unique in being a great player, but I think he's unique in his physique and what he's able to do with that physique. I can't say that I've seen anybody that I would compare him to in that sense, and you know, that's saying a lot. It's going to be fun to continue to watch him.
We've seen the conference for ACC men's basketball this season. We've seen Syracuse defeat Duke. We've seen North Carolina and Duke, obviously, you know, have that good head-to-head as they've always had. We've seen what Duke's been able to do and be nationally ranked number one. Virginia's obviously in the mix, and Louisville and Florida State has risen. Just what you could say about how, you know, the top of the ACC is really not decided, and as we roll toward this ACC men's basketball tournament, it's still an open door, and there's still a lot of things that can change from, I believe, the top spot all the way down to 9 or 10 in these next few weeks.
Well, that's very true, Dan, and I think that obviously the league is extremely strong this year, without question, as it seems to be every year. I suspect a lot of people didn't, at this stage, predict having three teams tied for the number one spot in the league. And, of course, those three teams are all in the top 10 in the nation in the rankings. And I think we found out last night, too, as we sometimes forget, you know, a game can change very quickly with you know, an injury or a player out or whatever it might be. So, you know, that was really interesting in the Duke Carolina game last night with Zion going out in the first half minute, basically, and certainly that can change things. So, you know, injuries are always a factor with teams in any sport, probably a bigger factor than the average fan really, you know, understands. So you don't know game to game, and you know, from that standpoint, but also from a competitive standpoint. I mean, we've last night people I'm sure didn't expect Syracuse to win by 20. Might have expected them to win, but probably not by 20. So it's what makes the game so great, I think, is the unexpected aspects of it.
And when we look at, you know, the unexpected, so to speak, speaking here with ACC Commissioner John Swofford, everybody expects UConn on the women's side of things to be at the top, to be number one, to be undefeated, to be that team that everybody's chasing. But this year, it hasn't been so. We've seen this UConn team in women's basketball lose some games, and we've seen some teams, obviously step it up and ramp it up. We know that Notre Dame is a strong team when it comes to women's basketball inside of the ACC, and we know that Louisville has obviously had themselves a tremendous season so far. Just what you can say about that, that for ACC women's basketball, you have Notre Dame, Louisville, and Miami as well, that these strong teams that have 10 conference wins or better, 22 wins or better overall, and that Notre Dame and Louisville are in the conversation for being potential national championship contenders, and that it's not just UConn this year, but there's more of an open door in women's basketball as well.
Yeah, and I think you go back to last year, Dan, with Notre Dame winning the national championship, and Louisville actually beat Notre Dame for the Atlantic Coast Conference tournament championship, and then Notre Dame won the national championship, and both of those two teams were in the Final Four, and so I don't think there's any question that we have two of the best teams in the country. In Notre Dame and Louisville, not only this season but last season as well. NC State is one you didn't mention that has had a great year up to this point, and then you have games where North Carolina, although the overall record is not terrific, they've beaten some really good. They've beaten North Carolina State, and then they beat Notre Dame as well. So our women's side of the league, and you mentioned Miami, Florida State. I mean, you can go on and on. There are a lot of good teams there, which is what you want, and certainly those two at the very top are national contenders.
And when you look at a team like Syracuse for ACC women's basketball, just what you can say about, what they've been able to do. They've top 15, top 8 recruiting classes, from year to year, what they've built from being a team that wasn't in the postseason to getting to the NIT, to going to the NCAA tournament, to 1 year getting their first Sweet 16, first Elite 8, first Final Four, first championship game. Coach Hughes and his staff has done a tremendous job there, recruiting and national respect, and obviously, they're in the mix of things here as well, and they, provide an opportunity to, have a different look in the ACC women's basketball tournament as well as what they're doing during the season. What do you think about Coach Q and Syracuse and what they're doing up north?
Well, and I appreciate you asking that, because I was going to get to that, because he's obviously building and has built a program, and that's what you want. You want the consistency. I think Syracuse women's basketball is at a point now where when people talk nationally in terms of women's basketball, Syracuse is right there and comes to mind in the national picture, and deservedly so. And it's the consistency. I think they're good teams and they're good programs. Q has built a really good program, and that comes with consistency. And as you said, the kind of recruiting and getting to the Final Four and having good, strong, winning seasons year in and year out, and that's when you call it a really good, outstanding program, and that's the appropriate tag for Syracuse women's basketball at this point.
So when you have that, speaking here with ACC Commissioner John Swofford, when you have the men's side of things, vying for championships and getting national respect and being in the top 25, and then you have the women's side doing the same thing, you're seeing, both of them give an opportunity not just to have great games inside of the conference and in non-conference before the season starts and in some of these, kind of mini tournaments, so to speak, but also when we see the national spotlight, just what it means to you as the commissioner to see the women's side of things take care of business and the men as well, and to know that you have a conference that is jam-packed full of teams that make it very difficult to play basketball from season to season.
Well, that's what you want, and it's good to see. I think the high level of competitiveness and high level of play in both men's and women's basketball during the regular season and in the ACC tournament is what prepares our teams for the postseason, and one reason they do so well in the postseason, and then you go beyond men's and women's basketball, and you take into consideration football and Florida State and Clemson having won 3 of the last 6 national championships, and you throw in baseball with men's and women's basketball, and Virginia winning a national championship there 4 years ago. We're the only conference that has had the national champion in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and baseball during that 4-year period. And so the other thing you like to see is consistency over time and competitiveness over time. And we're getting that with a number of our sports in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and that's what you strive for from this chair.
And when we look at, like you had mentioned, when it comes to football, I want to go back to a time where Dabo Swinney took over the job at Clemson, and he had made the statement that he was going to build Clemson into something special. He was going to create something, and some people thought that he didn't have the credentials to take the job. Some people laughed him off and thought he was crazy. Now everybody sees what he believed in back then. Just what you could say about that story, that Dabo used to be the guy that people thought, yeah, okay, you'll get it done, coach, whatever you say. And now he's one of the most respected, honored coaches of any sport in America. Just what you could say about, the beginning to where he is now.
Well, he's a remarkable guy, and the job that he has done at Clemson is obviously extraordinary. And when Dabo was not a coordinator, he was moved into the interim job in sort of mid-season when he took over, and but it gave him the opportunity to show he could do the job. Terry Don Phillips was the athletic director at Clemson at the time, and when Terry Don decided to make a change in mid-season, he called me, and we had a long conversation, and he wanted to tell me what he was doing and who he was going to put in the interim job, and that was Dabo, of course. And after I hung up, and I didn't share this with anybody but my wife, but I told her at dinner, I said, I can tell you right now who's in the interim isn't going to change. And the reason I said that was because I could sense and hear from Terry Don that how committed he was to Dabo and how highly he thought of Dabo and what he could become. And so I give a lot of credit to not only Dabo, but Terry Don Phillips, the AD at the time, who saw something in Dabo that maybe some other people hadn't had a chance to see yet. And I've always thought that the most important thing that athletic directors do, and they do a lot of important things, but the most important is hire coaches. And that was obviously a tremendous hire in giving a young assistant who had not been a coordinator but was the wide receivers coach the opportunity to see what he could do. And obviously he's done it.
And, also one of the coaches that has joined the ACC recently here, in Dino Babers, he had made the statement, came out to the court during a basketball game at the Carrier Dome and asked the fans to believe. He said, have faith, belief without evidence that this team is going to be good. Have faith in us, have belief in us that we're going to get it done. And then he came onto that court 3 years later with a 10-3 record, the Camping World Bowl championship, and, obviously a lot of success in recruiting that's come from that. What can you say about what Dino Babers has done when now here's a coach in the here and now that asked people to believe, who was also laughed off, and he got to 10 wins in his third season and is obviously building from there and finished second overall when you look at all 15 schools in the ACC, or 14 schools, I should say, in the ACC football. Just what you could say about what Dino has done.
Well, it's tremendous, and it's tremendous not only for Syracuse and the state of New York in terms of college football, but for the Atlantic Coast Conference. And a lot of people don't realize this, and I tell people this a lot. Syracuse has more wins in college football than any other university in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And a lot of people forget that. And it's nice to see that tremendous tradition and history resurrected under Dino's leadership. And when you watch Dino and you watch Dabo and you see the positiveness that they have about them in how they approach everything. There's a lot to be said for that. There's a similarity there that I think should be mentioned, because believing is a big part of anything, and when leaders believe something and they're able to convince others of that same belief and that same vision, then that's what gets great results. And certainly, with the year Dino had this year, and how well they played Clemson as well too. They're 2 years ago, Clemson's only loss before losing in the CFP was to Syracuse, and their toughest game this year was against Syracuse. So that tells you something as well.
And finally here, speaking with ACC Commissioner John Swofford. John, we're in the year of the ACC linear network. The ACC network that we've been talking about for a couple of years here now is going to be set to jump off on August 22nd, 2019, and then there will be a game immediately following that will be on the ACC network with Clemson and Georgia Tech. Just what you could tell us about the ACC network, what people should know about, having to buy it, or if it's in a pack. I mean, just what information you know about how fans can access this, and just kind of where it's at right now.
Well, go to ACC Network, ACCN.com, and ESPN can direct you to doing anything you might need to do. The key is, we're in great shape with the network. It's right where it needs to be at this point in time. The early distribution deals have gone extremely well. There's a lot more left to do in that regard. In terms of production work, in terms of the type of programming we're going to have, in terms of scheduling, in terms of talent, all of that is moving along right on schedule, if not ahead of schedule. And I think this network is going to be a huge plus for our institutions and for our conference from an exposure standpoint. And our exposure is really good right now, but it's only going to get better. And from a financial standpoint, it's a tremendous opportunity for us and for ESPN. So I'm expecting it to be very successful as it evolves over the next few years after its launch in August. I think it'd be great for our institutions. And the reason I really think it's going to be successful is the content that our schools provide, because we have a great conference, and I think that's obvious to the world. It's going to be must-see television if you're an ACC fan or a fan of a school in the ACC. And so there's going to be great content there. And I think we have the best partner you can have in something like this in ESPN. They're not called the worldwide leader, for nothing. They've earned that in terms of sports television. So it'll be a very significant launch, and it's being prominently marketed at this point in time, and I think it'll be tremendous for Syracuse fans, for ACC fans.
That coming from Atlantic Coast Conference Commissioner John Swofford. John, as always, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to seeing you very soon for the ACC tournament as it returns to North Carolina, and God bless to you and yours.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be with you.